Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another mini art history lecture. The tea I am sipping on today is this wonderful peach apricot hibiscus that I picked up at the Sunday Farmers Market this morning with a dear friend of mine. And I thought I should include this in the video today because if there's one thing about me is I'm a huge tea enthusiast. I'm very sensitive to caffeine, so as a college student, I can't drink coffee, which is awful, so tea is my main source of caffeine usually. And this is just a decaf tea, but it is so good. It has hibiscus, papaya, pineapple, raisins, and marigold infused into it. And look at the color infused into my glass teapot infuser. Like, are you kidding me? This is so beautiful. Like, it'd be like I'm in Twilight, like I'm drinking like hibiscus blood or something. But anyways, that is the drink I'll be sipping on as I discuss today's artist, Na Hye-sok. I don't know if I've been feeling particularly influential with what I'm doing for work right now. Me and a lovely group of people this summer will actually be working on an exhibition that will be focusing on storytelling through the lens of immigrant motherhood. And that's just something so beautiful to me because I think the relationship between a mother and daughter is something so intricate, so complex, so deep. It's a really heavy theme that's shown a lot in a lot of female artists' work. And I think it's just a really strong topic that can be explored and expressed in so many different mediums and ways. So I chose Na Hye-sok today because she is actually known to be the first ever radical Korean artist of her time. So Na Hye-sok is known and pretty infamous because she's actually known to be the first ever Korean to bring Western oil style painting to Korea. So as a woman, she first introduced post-impressionism and naturalist styles to Korea, which were very heavily Western influenced, and they emphasize this idea of form and color and lighting. And as a woman, this is pretty unheard of for her to introduce this whole new emerging art era within a region that had never been seen before. And she was actually the most prominent figure in the first ever radically feminist movement, the New Woman movement in Korea. She's so well known for her contributions to modern Korean art, not only through her paintings, but also through literature, because she's also known to be a super renowned writer within the Korean Poet Society. She would very often create paintings and sculptures and prints that very often depicted women and their experiences in the Korean patriarchal system. Han-sok was born in 1896 and raised in a family in the Lee dynasty, and this was basically the last Korean ruling dynasty before the Japanese annexation and the whole beginnings of Japanese colonialism in Korea. At 17 in 1913, she actually began studying oil painting at the Women's School of Art in Tokyo. And during the annexation of Korea, which was a period that lasted up to 36 years, it was the absolute ultimate prestige to attend a Japanese university as a Korean citizen. And for her to do this, especially as a woman, was something that was extremely profound and very rare. During her study in Japan, Han-sok produced a variety of a number of essays and poems advocating for equal opportunities for women over time. A lot of her literary works and pieces have been dissected by critics, and you can see that she has taken a lot of influence from Western first wave feminists such as Virginia Woolf, George Eliot, and Jane Austen. I would say Na Hye-sok's most famous piece of literature or work of literature she has written was called Gonghi. It was published in 1918 while she was still studying in Japan, and basically what it was it concerned a woman's self-discovery and her search for meaning in her life as a quote new woman. It's basically considered the first ever fictional feminist short story that was published and read by millions in Korea. So throughout her life, she's very well known for fighting societal oppression and prejudice against her strong, talented, independent fellow women of Korea. So in the 1920s, she actually met Woo Young Kim, who was a friend of an older brother who attended the same university as her at the time. And they actually ended up getting married, and he was a very affluent career man. He was an aspiring young lawyer, and Han-sok was still studying art at the time, and she actually bravely asked him for him to support her interests and her studies and her education in art rather than asking her to assume the position of a housewife in Korean society. And in the 1920s, this is basically absolutely unheard of in Korea. Usually in this time period, once you get married, you would absolutely 100% assume the role of the housewife, of the matriarch or housekeeper of the family. So by doing this, she was basically placing her privacy and independence over these traditional Korean family values and having to take care of her in-law parents, which is, like I said, absolutely unheard of. In the 1920s, Korean society put a huge emphasis on filial piety. And if you didn't know, in Confucian ethics, this is considered the absolute highest virtue. So after returning to Korea, she actually held her first exhibition of oil paintings in Seoul in 1921. At that time, oil painting was not really well known nor accepted among the Korean public, like I said before. And also at this time, no person, no man nor woman, had ever been able to display a single person exhibit in all of Korea's history. Han-sok was basically the first one, and with the success of this first ever single artist exhibition, she started to gain experience and publicity for her career as an artist. So this is one of the paintings that was actually supposedly displayed in her one-person exhibit, and it is actually a self-portrait of Hye-sok. In this self-portrait, you can see that it's very difficult to find these virtues of Koreanness or female conformity that was so common in Korean society. In this painting, she kind of chooses to emphasize her identity as a modern, educated Korean woman. And you can see this through her choice of painting clothing, wearing very modern clothing, not a traditional hanbok. And in her hairstyle, you can see that it has been styled in a very Western traditional way, that it has been styled into these soft waves and two buns in the back. The dark palette of the background of her portrait kind of blends in with Na's hair, and this dress was kind of created to create a very flat surface for her face to be very prominent in this painting. Her face seems to be holding some very deep, grief-holding emotion. The carved and partially shadowed face that she paints of herself has these very dark, deep eyes, and her slightly pressed mouth kind of conveys the sense of wariness that she has been facing. And I guess my take on this is that she has the ability to paint herself as modern in her paintings, but no matter how much she paints herself to be modern, in this time she was still living in a society where these conservative ideas that held women back from achieving real things and having significant social change was just holding her back. You can really see the influence of Western painting in this portrait, especially with Cubism, which was a really important painting technique in the Western days in the 1920s. And you can see in the bone structure of her self-portrait that it's a very prominent Westernized facial structure. Some critics have actually seen this as a purposeful choice for painting because it was Hye-sok's desire to kind of express her wish to understand Western women and their freedom and how they lived. In 1929, again, she actually returned from a round trip to Europe to just explore the world, I guess. And she had actually a second one-person exhibit. and also published numerous essays about 20th century European art history. This, I would say, was the absolute peak of her career. She was doing so well. Her art was gaining recognition, and although she was obviously clearly receiving a little bit of critical feedback from the general conservative Korean public, a lot of people were viewing her work and her identity and kind of looking more into these progressive ideals of Western society. However, in 1931, her husband unfortunately found out that Na Hye-sok was actually involved in an affair. And this was allegedly when she was in Paris. Hye-sok kind of refuted these claims by claiming that this alleged affair absolutely had no impact on her artwork, nor should it impact the way the public viewed her artwork, and it absolutely had no impact on her familial relationships with her husband or her children. Whether or not this scandal turned out to be true, for a married woman to have absolutely any allegations of cheating or infidelity or adultery in conservative Korean society, this was an absolute fatal rejection from society, because it was actually proven that Hye-sok's husband was also involved in an affair. But of course, double standards were very prominent back then, and it absolutely did not matter that he was involved in an affair. It only mattered that she did. After this marital incident, the darkness in her paintings kind of started to show up. So unfortunately, the marriage actually ended up in a divorce, and this was at a time, like I said, when marital infidelity and divorce was absolutely uncommon and very highly stigmatized. In 1935, she tried to actually have a third one-person exhibit, but unfortunately, very few attended to the show, and this is kind of when we see her career decline from its peak. Unfortunately, Hye-sok's reputation in Korea as a divorcee and kind of this awful perception of her as an immoral woman absolutely tainted her career in any form. The third one-person show had very few attendees, gained very little recognition, and it kind of turned out to be a very unfortunate, unrecoverable loss on her end, financially and emotionally. So basically, after everything had been taken from her, her husband, her career, her status as an educated woman, there's this very prominent painting in her career of these peonies. And I guess this painting kind of reflects her hope to be free from these societal restrictions. She uses another Western technique in this painting called impasto, and it basically contains these very visible brush paints of very thick paint that create very clear paint streaks on top of the canvas that kind of capture this idea of fleeting moments when the wind blows the peonies to a blur in the foreground. The very heavy texture and movements of the brush strokes kind of employ this idea of a very strenuous, windy excursion. Now, this is something that I thought was really interesting, this kind of idea of a society fleshing out these immoral women. And there's actually this one piece written by Ruth Benedict where she kind of goes more deeper into this idea of guilt culture and shame culture as opposed to Western societies and Eastern societies. In guilt society, which is most primarily seen in Western societies, the primary method of social control is where the feeling of guilt for behaviors that the individual believes is to be very undesirable. In a shame culture or an honor shame culture, which is very prevalent in Eastern Asian societies, what other people believe, especially your family, is the absolute utmost importance. Honor is a key virtue in this society, and the whole culture is very oriented around honor. It's kind of inculcated around the honor of your family, the honor of your tribe, the honor of your village, the honor of your city, and the honor of the nation you represent. And I guess the only flaw with the shame honor society compared to the guilt society is that there's this perception of the self as very worthless and powerful compared to the whole. While the belief with the guilt society is that there are possibilities of corrective action that can be taken to address the consequences of behavior that is tied with guilt, which can be seen today in American societies with our very heavy prison complex system, which is what actually Benedict talks a lot about. And I don't know, I thought that was pretty heavily correlated to this whole idea of the societal oppression that Hye-sok experienced in her lifetime as a woman. So yeah, I don't know, I just thought it was really interesting. But if you are more interested, you should definitely read something by Ruth Benedict. She is actually the first ever female cultural anthropologist. I find her work so interesting and so inspiring, so go check some of her pieces out. So during the years of her pain and anguish after this experience, Hye-sok tried to comfort herself and tried to take residence in a Buddhist temple to become a nun. However, as a modern, educated woman who grew up in a city her whole life, this actually turned out to be something a little bit very undesirable for her, so she actually did return, even though it was the return of a woman outcast by society. In her words, she actually writes, in English translation, "I was a tiny bird shot down by society." She actually also published, very bravely, another article that was titled "Confession About My Divorce." And in this, she kind of described her reasons for getting divorced in the first place, very heavily criticized gender inequality, and declared that every woman, especially every Korean woman, deserved autonomy as an independent person. Unfortunately, this did not have the echoing effect that she hoped it would have on Korean society, and it actually made the public shun her even more, and it kind of made her dig herself deeper into this pit of societal outcast. Unfortunately, little is known about the last parts of her life, and it is believed that she spent it in poverty and very isolated alienation before she passed away alone in 1948 in a charity hospital, and she is buried still today in an unknown grave. Despite her very outsized influence on Korean art, literature, and feminist politics, her name, even after her death, was kind of recognized in Korea as this cautionary tale for women who didn't really adhere to these expectations of a woman's duty. Her work was actually blacklisted from a lot of history books and museums for years until absolute decades after her death. There's no doubt that Hye-sok was this pioneer for females in Korea in the 1920s, and I guess her contribution to the modern history of art in Korea and this awful, painful price she had to pay to pave the path for future generations should be recognized, especially in Korean history textbooks and art history textbooks today. Although Hye-sok never actually lived to see this society where women are given their full autonomy and independence, she was undoubtedly able to pass her dreams on to her future generations in hope that they would value and carry on her struggle. And we do, and I hope that you do as well. She was able to push past these boundaries fearlessly of a model life of a Korean woman. I would say overall in total, her aspirations to bring her buried talents of a woman to light did not die when she did. Even today, it lives on to influence the artistic and political work of numerous generations of Korean women who came after her. I guess this video was a lot more different than my other ones because my other ones focus a lot more specifically on the paintings, but I guess Na Hye-sok was someone I wanted to make a video about and kind of emphasize a little bit about her life and her career's purpose rather than the actual works that were produced during her life. But yeah, I don't know. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I feel like this artist specifically today really resonated with me, especially as my identity as a Korean American woman. I found so much intrinsic thought when I was actually personally researching her and looking into the topic in her works. And again, like I say in every video, thank you so much for the beautiful feedback that I receive on these videos. It is so crazy to me that like people actually DM me on Instagram or comment on my YouTube or I don't know, find me through TikTok and comment these things on my videos and these DMs about how grateful they are for these little tidbits of personal research that I love to do. And I don't know how else to explain how like warming it is to know people actually watch my videos for enjoyment and enjoy these, because so much joy goes into it for me when I make these and I research these things. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful for everyone that watches my videos, no matter how many videos you've watched, whether this is the first video you've watched by me. Every viewer counts. I'm so glad I was able to gauge an audience either way, no matter how big or small it was. And like I say in every video, I will be trying to produce as many as I can this summer. But thank you so much for watching another mini art history lecture, and I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful rest of your day.